thanks for the opportunity to come and talk to you today. It's been really good to work, I think, in conjunction with the group in developing the strategy, and it's certainly, I think, added a lot of value to that process. So just a quick summary of what I intend to speak about today is just what is a growth management strategy. It's a planning type term, so hopefully you'll understand a bit more about what that actually is. What we've done so far and the things that we've learnt since we started the process. Just introduce some of the current work that we're doing about infill development and the methodology that we're looking at and why we're focusing on that at this particular point in time. What the next steps are to actually finish the strategy, and also to just finish with presenting the draft vision as we have it so far, just to present it to you, get your thoughts on it, and explain why it's such an important part of what we're doing. So a growth management strategy, in one respect, it's a prerequisite for change in the planning world. There's a legal, framework that requires us to do this if we're contemplating significant changes to our planning instruments. We can tinker around with some minor changes to things, but if we're proposing something more wide-reaching, such as looking at different subdivision patterns or zonings, then we need to have it embedded in a growth management strategy. It's the key strategic planning document, and it's the first step to eventually being reflected in things like the local environmental plan. So it's also an opportunity for the community to really determine where and how they grow and how they think we should be responding to change. It's a point of reference to assess future proposals against. We don't know exactly what's going to happen in the future all the time, but if we've got a strong strategic direction, then we can look at things that come out of left field and determine are they consistent with the strategy that we've adopted, and use that as a point of reference for council to determine whether we support them or not. A growth management strategy is multifaceted in that it can comprise a number of different sub-strategies. So what we're working on at the moment is a local housing strategy, and that's what I'll be talking about today. But we will also be developing employment land strategy and rural land strategy over the next year. So it can encompass all of those different approaches to development issues within the Shire. It's also can be multifaceted in its scope. So one of the things that it obviously will look at is recommending changes to our planning instruments. It's mostly a planning document, but it can also have aspirations and aspirational targets within it. It can be used as a platform for council to advocate for improved outcomes in certain areas, and also just the nitty-gritty actions, which might be let's change the planning, let the local environmental plan to do A, B and C. So the growth management strategy will include all of those sorts of things. So just in terms of the strategic process, this is the way that we've been carrying out the work with the strategy so far. So the first stage is to really look at where are we at? What are the key statistics and trends that we're seeing in the community? And Kerry and other speakers have mentioned some of those things in terms of the lack of housing diversity and population growth and all those sorts of things. So we've been through that stage already. We're at the moment now, we're looking at where does the place want to be and developing the vision. That's kind of where we're at the moment in terms of the workflow. And ultimately, how will the place get there will be the action plan. So when we put the final strategy on public exhibition, hopefully it will be a clear plan of action to achieve the sorts of outcomes that we're looking for. So where we've been so far, the Homes for Our Future discussion paper, I'm not going to go into great detail about it. For those of you who were here last year, Rebecca is a planner that works for council as well, and this is mostly her body of work, which is a really great starting point, I think, for us to understand where we are and where we've come from. The document, if you haven't had a look at it, I'd encourage you to have a read of it. It's interesting to just know the history of the Shire and the sorts of trends that have happened, and to really give a good snapshot of the things that we're facing at the moment and need to plan forward. So just to go over again, some of the key trends that were identified is an ageing population. There's an out-migration of young people in general terms from the Shire. Lack of smaller housing stock. We've hit on that several times, that there's a predominance of 3 to 4 bedroom single dwelling housing stock in the Shire. Lack of smaller housing, reducing affordability. Again, there's a fair bit of data in the discussion paper pointing to that, and low growth projections as it stands at the moment. So if the current trends in Bellingen Shire were to continue to 2036, I think, then we'd actually start losing population. So that was an interesting observation about recent developments. So the discussion paper was put on public exhibition. We had, I think, a really good response rate to it. We had 250 submissions, 28 comprising 28 feedback forms, 37 emails, 15 agency responses from government agencies that had an interest in this sector. We had 21 requests from landowners to rezone their properties, which may sound like a lot, but compared to previous strategies that we've done, it was actually fairly low in terms of previous interest in that. We had a lot of just sticky notes. We went to markets and various other places and tried to give as many opportunities for people to get their thoughts to us. Some people feel daunted by writing a detailed letter or email, so it could be as simple as writing an idea on a sticky note and putting it in a box. We convened some focus groups as well with like a seniors focus group. We met with the Bellingen High School Senior Youth Council, I forgot the name exactly, and Aboriginal land councils and various other interest groups to really get some targeted feedback from them. So over 1,900 comments or ideas, and we also ran a photo competition to, basically show us what you love about the Shire, which also drew attention to the process and got some good ideas of what people value with the Shire. So in terms of the positions on growth that were expressed as part of the public consultation, over half of the submissions supported growth, but it was a qualified support. So generally it hinged upon that growth being environmentally conscious and retaining character and community connections, and that it came with increasing choice in terms of affordable housing options. In terms of the preferred growth scenarios, the main preferred scenario was infill growth. So in the discussion paper, we asked people to consider 4 sorts of options for how we might grow. One was to just to have infill development, which is basically increasing densities within existing town areas. The other one was to grow at the edges, which is called greenfield development. That's characteristic of what the Shire has done primarily over recent years, and there's quite a bit of land zoned on the edges of town for subdivision. The other option was, should we grow in completely new areas? So, for example, a new village or a new town somewhere. And the other option was that we shouldn't have any growth and that we don't support it. So these aren't mutually exclusive options, of course, and there's most likely will be a mix of those different types of things that actually happens. But the main emphasis was on infill development. So some of the main themes that came out of the consultation, so in terms of affordability and choice, there was a strong preference for a need for more smaller homes and to resist the growth of the McMansion style house that you observe in some of the other areas of Northwest Growth Corridor and that. There was a suggestion that we should consider allowing granny flats as larger than 60 square metres, there's a current restriction in council's LEP. So that's secondary dwellings. Support for tiny homes was a fairly strong theme that came through, and just in terms of a greater variety of choices. In terms of the environment, there was a requests for increased emphasis on solar power and things like composting toilets, that council's policy may permit that sort of thing to happen. There was a desire to minimise impacts on sensitive areas, so to avoid new development impacting upon environmentally sensitive areas. In terms of character and culture, there was a suggestion that we needed to look at improving the aesthetics and the design of new development. A common sort of statement that came out was no cookie cutter development, so I guess a desire to retain the character of Bellingen, Dorrigo, Urunga, the whole Shire that currently exists, and that it's not just a generic form of housing stock that changes that character. And, you know, retaining heritage character as well, that's obviously an important thing, perhaps more so in Bellingen than the other towns. In terms of governance, there was some suggestion that council needed to improve its, you know, information and systems to facilitate the supply of housing. Red tape was mentioned before. That was one of the suggestions, that we need to perhaps help people more so to invest in these sorts of housing types. There was a suggestion that we might offer development incentives for people who are investing in particular types of housing that are viewed as that we want to see in the Shire. In terms of economy, so some people had the view that you can't look at housing in isolation of employment opportunities, which is a fair point, pointing out that we should be looking at encouraging you know, more creative industries in the Shire and supporting high-tech type development as an employment generating strategy. We will be looking at that, as I said before, in an employment land strategy and revisiting those sorts of things and what we can do to encourage greater economic activity in the Shire. In terms of infrastructure, just a desire to have more parking and parks for sports facilities. And in terms of rural lands, there was some pressure, I guess, to subdivide rural land, but other people valued retaining that rural character as well. Community title subdivision was something else that was mentioned. We have quite a lot of existing multiple occupancies in the Shire, and some of the people who live on those would like to be able to subdivide those multiple occupancy developments. So they were the main themes that came out of the exhibition. So as far at the moment what we're doing, the main focus was on infill development, so that's what we're working on at the moment. It was a community's preferred growth scenario. We also have to look at infill development before we consider any sorts of other growth options. That's embedded in the North Coast Regional Plan, so there's a legal prerequisite to do that as well. And I guess the other reason why it's worth looking at is it's incremental. It doesn't rely upon single landowners actually making a decision to develop. We have a lot of land that's zoned on the fringes of town for subdivision that hasn't come to fruition. So rather than relying upon those landowners making the decision to provide housing and subdivision opportunities, infill spreads that across a much wider range of people, and we think increases, you know, the likelihood that you'll get some outcomes there. Also, it's more economically feasible, or can be, than greenfield land release, because you're looking at existing infrastructure rather than having to construct those new connections to the greenfield areas. So the way that we're looking at investigating this at the moment is just determining how much land there actually is available for infill housing. So we've separated the town areas into different localities. We exclude non-developable areas such as roads, flood-prone areas, which is in Bellingen Shire is quite a major constraint. Existing developments, so the existing housing stock that's on the property, and look at some setback requirements as well. And then we're really just determining the amount of area that's potentially available for infill development in each of those localities, and modelling the number of dwellings that we think could be accommodated there. So that's the basic methodology for what we're doing at the moment. In terms of what infill development should look like, we're looking at developing local character statements that will be used as a point of reference for people who want to do infill development. We're looking at getting some best practice and locally appropriate design examples. So looking at engaging architects to have a look at the vision that we've got and give us some ideas of how they think that we could develop housing stock that's consistent with that vision. And we'll also, model some potential changes to our design criteria. So we can, for example, say what happens if we reduce the setbacks or increase the height limit or change the density with which you can develop. We're looking at getting some worked examples so that we can see what that looks like. Also, so that we can have examples when we go on public exhibition to actually show the community, look, here's what we think increased density could look like, and that people can really make some informed comment and feedback for council on that. So the remaining steps is to finalise the actions, so that's the real nitty-gritty of it. We'll have further workshops with councillors leading up to the development of the strategy, and ultimately council meetings to hopefully adopt the plan to put on public exhibition. When we publicly exhibit, there'll be a lot of opportunities for further public input, and we'd welcome the opportunity to work with the housing group as well, and other groups such as, we went and spoke at Urunga Neighbourhood Centre a couple of weeks ago, and that was really good to get access to, people and contacts and lists, and to get good reach into the community that people know about it and actually can make submissions. We really want to get as much feedback as we can. So then it's considering the submissions and to final adoption. So hopefully that will all be complete by the end of the year is the plan. So I just thought I'd finish with presenting, this is the draft vision for a local housing strategy that we've developed. It strongly references the key issues that came out of the community consultation, and we want to have a very clear line of sight between those things that were of importance to the community and the vision that we've actually developed. So I won't read them all out there, but we're going to looking at encouraging housing choices, emphasising that new housing is located mostly in and around existing town centres, striving for greater opportunity and affordability in the housing market. We have high quality design of housing that emphasises and retains neighbourhood character and community connections, that housing reflects the environmental ethos of the community. That was a strong theme that came through in the consultation. And also that we look at protecting the farmland and rural character of the Shire, but consider opportunities for regenerative and innovative farming opportunities. So that's where we're at. The vision is really important because all of the actions that we develop will have a clear line of sight to that vision, and as I said before, if we get things that come in that we hadn't planned for, we will go back to the vision to see whether or not they're consistent with it in determining whether that's worth supporting or not. So, yeah, that's where we're at. Thanks.